Welcome back to the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Last time Samuel sailed as mate on the Thetis to Philadelphia, where they exchanged goods. From there, the ship went to Kingston, Jamaica, where Samuel had the opportunity to try to find some of his old friends, though he had little luck and bad news regarding almost all of them. The ship departed Jamaica with a notable leak, but after leaving the Newfoundland coast, they made it back to Great Britain, where Samuel took over as shipmaster of a ship named the John. We find Samuel now at Newcastle. The 17th, the wind being strong at northwest, we sailed in company with 30 vessels soon after daylight. We experienced much bad weather and had to lay to several times. We also split many sails, and as the vessel was very deeply laden, the sea used to make a free passage over her. For several days we had much labor with a pump, particularly on one tack, which made us conclude the leak was in her topside. On our passage, a flying fish, nearly as large as a mackerel, flew on board, which I preserved. On the 25th of December, saw the Barbary shore, and before dark entered the straits. Soon after, a fog came on, and the wind so squally and variable that we scarcely knew whether we were on the Spanish or Barbary side of the Gut, for as we endeavored to keep close to a weather shore, by frequent changes of wind, we were often on the lee shore. At last it cleared a little when we found we had providentially escaped running on a low flat island at the foot of Mount Abila, or Apes Hill, on the Moorish side, and soon after saw the hill of Gibraltar, which I scarcely need say gave me great pleasure. On the 5th of January, 1790, passed Cape St. Martin, and saw the island of Ivica, and soon afterwards had a foul wind and bad weather, which kept us 5 days in sight of the island of Mount Columbretta. The 16th, I was much gratified with a fine sight of the mountains of Monserrado, in the kingdom of Catalonia, the large summit of which is formed with spires, similar to a cluster of spar stones in England, but more peaked. It was about 14 miles in circumference and 30 miles from Barcelona, inhabited by monks and hermits. The 17th saw Mount Jovi. About midnight I was alarmed by the mate calling out that the vessel was on shore. I ran immediately on deck and asked the reason of his not throwing the lead. He replied that he had just done so but could find no bottom. I then looked over the side and discovered we were in the midst of a luminous circle of small fishes, which the mate was not aware of, and which had made him think we had struck the ground. As the day dawned, a long cloud of white smoke appeared on the land, which we soon found arose from the city of Barcelona. As the wind was very feeble, we hoisted out the boat to tow the vessel, and about 3 p.m. anchored in Barcelona Road. We got in the straits in 38 days, and were 24 more before we arrived here. A Spanish boat came off and informed me that I must content to remain in the road till we had lightered the vessel, as there was not sufficient depth of water for her to go over the bar. To expedite our delivery, I immediately took my papers and proceeded in our boat for the mole, but on approaching the bar found the waves running high, and the surf very dangerous. But seeing a small vessel going in, we followed her, and our crew had to row with all their might to prevent the rolling surf from oversetting our yawl. This roadstead is open to the east and south, and the water deep, but the greatest danger arises from the numberless anchors lost here. Whilst we remained, 2 out of the 4 vessels in the roads had their cables cut through, and another brig had hers damaged. The mud dredged daily in the mole is brought out in well vessels, and let out by means of a hatch in the bottom in the road. The 21st we sent 7 boats laden on shore at the head of the mole, where the Spanish boats laden are accustomed to be drawn up on dry land by horses. The corn was thrown from the boats on mats, and the government required that for the first 3 days the poor might purchase, not exceeding a specified quantity for each person, at the rate the bulk of the cargo was sold at, which is a good regulation and lessens the evil of monopoly. Our men on the beach informed me that not only the Spaniards were apt to steal, but the horses would approach the wheat softly, and taking a mouthful, would immediately run off to eat it. I detected a man sitting on the corn and playing with it, but observing him narrowly from a distant spot, I perceived that he was in the act of stowing it in his trousers, tucked into his shoes. I approached him behind, and having laid my hickory stick across his shoulders, he jumped up at the same time pulling his trousers, discharged the grain to prevent proof of the theft. The city of Barcelona is well built, the houses lofty, and often the outsides have various figures painted in colors, on a white ground, such as flower pots, vases, urns, men, women, animals, etc., in ridiculous attitudes, and I have seen many of the scenes represented by Cervantes in Don Quixote portrayed on a house. The walls round the city are high and sufficiently wide on top for 2 or 3 carriages abreast, with slopes to ascend them. Many fine brass cannon are mounted thereon, there being a foundry for such in the city. There are a number of strong gates, 2 towards the port. People enter at one of these and go out the other. The gates are shut while the porters go to dinner. I saw the governor, O'Reilly, in his carriage on the walls with 2 dragoons mounted as his precursors, and the different guards turn out on their appearance. The exchange or meeting of merchants is held in an open square, the governor's palace making one of the sides, and I saw a black petticoat spread to dry in the sun on a balcony rail on the first floor of the said palace. When the clock strikes 12 on the great bell of the cathedral, which sounds loud and solemn, it is customary for all the inhabitants to repeat their paternosters. Those at work or walking in the streets take off their hats, stand still till the prayer is finished, and the clock ceases striking. The whole is repeated again at sunset. Many of the British residents here appear in the streets with their hair fully dressed without hats, except a hat for ceremony under the arm, according to the French fashion. Having received orders from the vessel's owner to load sea salt at the most eligible part of the Mediterranean, and to proceed with the same as quick as possible to Philadelphia, we began to take on board our ballast. I never was in a place where I received more civility and attention than this. I only dined on board twice, having sometimes from 2 to 4 different invitations in a day from the British merchants. A gentleman with whom I had no connection in the way of business invited me often to dine, sup, and to go with him to the opera. At this theater, seats in the pit have arms. Several of the front rows are let in single seats by the year. Such seat is lifted up at quitting it on the performing nights, and locked fast to the back by the occupier. There were several sentinels under arms in the place, and I perceived that the fathers of the Inquisition had a spacious stall to gratify their sensuality. This piece was a comic opera by Italians, but I think I was never more disgusted at any public performance, and the actors were obliged frequently to make an abrupt application to the prompter, who sat on the edge of the stage with his back to the audience, and I think his feet and legs must have hung down in a hole. He made many motions with the book in his hand, and the whole appeared so ridiculous that I never went afterwards. There were about 10,000 troops in this garrison, mostly Walloon, or foreign guards, as the Catalans were not thought the most faithful subjects. The officers of the army by the king's orders were to have free admission to all private balls. Therefore the citizens are often annoyed with the intrusions of these pragmatical gentry. There was much intrigue carried on amongst high and low, and the morals corrupted in general. The merchants' tables were well served with 2 or 3 courses, and the livery servants well dressed. A decanter of water stood on one side of each of the guests on the table, and a decanter of small red wine on the other, with a tumbler for each to help himself without trouble. After the dessert, 1 or at most 2 glasses of good-bodied wine was drunk, then a cup of coffee, and sometimes the repast ended with a small glass of French cordial. One of the consuls, a Spaniard, with whom I dined twice or thrice, had a spacious palace, and being remarkably civil, conducted me through a great part of it, nor did he omit taking me abruptly into a large bedchamber, where his daughters were sitting, who appeared rather surprised at my visit. On leaving this house, I passed a number of ecclesiastics singing, or rather bawling, at the door of a dwelling in which someone was sick. I had to avoid the host twice while in this place to prevent my kneeling in the street, as the soldiers who attended sometimes ill-treat strangers that will not conform to this way of adoration. The suburbs of this city, next the harbor named Barcelona, was built on ground recovered from the sea, by throwing the earth and stones washed down from the mountains on the spot. In the front of this little uniform town, inhabited by mechanics and seafaring men, the sailmakers worked at their business in the open air, which is generally clear and fine, for though I was here in January, I think there had been no rain for 6 weeks, and I have seen one of the planets at high noon, from the clearness of the atmosphere. Women are mostly employed on the sails. Two of the British captains walking behind a priest on the walls made very free with his person, using obscene words. After listening to their conversation some time, the priest turned around and mildly reproved the sea captains, informing them in English that he would have them be careful of their words in public, for it was not every man in the habit of a priest that was a Spaniard. Having remitted what I could to my owners by a draft on London, I procured 400 or 500 gold dollars to carry with me to Yavachi to purchase the salt, as silver is not allowed to be exported from Barcelona. I was put under the protection of many saints when I sailed, such as the Virgin Mary, Saint Ramundi, Saint Francis, and others, whose figures and names were at the head of my bill of health procured here. On the 10th of February, 1790, we sailed for Yavachi. At the entrance of the harbor I was met by a boat with ladies and gentlemen therein playing music, who congratulated me on my arrival, and tacking about led the van to the anchorage. Having anchored in this snug harbor in 4 fathoms, I proceeded in our boat to the landing place to look for the health officer, the musical party accompanying me. The health officer now questioned me in Spanish about our crew, and whether any Turks had visited us on our passage. The crew were now called over, and those that had not florid complexions were examined, being directed to extend their arms whilst the doctor pressed their sides and armpits to ascertain that they had not the plague. On inviting the company into the cabin, some cigars being on the table, were immediately pounced on by these ravenous gentry. After they had ate and drank, I went on shore with them and found the vice-consul on the mole waiting for me, who informed me that a British captain had lost an earthen pint and a silver spoon by means of the island visitors. The next day Mr. Wills, the vice-consul, and myself set off on foot for the salt pond, taking with us some hard-boiled eggs and a pork sausage of his providing. As we passed through the country, I perceived the enclosures for barley were very stony, which I imagined was the effect of indolence, but I was given to understand that the number of small stones screwed over the ground kept it moist from the rays of the sun, which would otherwise parch it up. The natives appeared very poor, and the country women wore large queues, suspended from the crown hair and bound with white tape, the inside being stiffened with a piece of wood, and ending below their middle in hair from mules' tails. Having reached the salt pond, I found a certain depth of water is let in from the sea, which in the course of the summer dries up and leaves about 5 inches deep of sea salt. A particular day is appointed for farmers to attend, who rake it and carry it on mules to the rising ground, where it is heaped up in the shape of soldiers' tents. Each person then deposits a certificate under a stone near the top ridge to certify that he raked that heap. The heaps are of various tints, some reddish, some white, gray, and brown. One man was reading a license to eat eggs in Lent. These papers were now issuing from the Pope's agent at 11 pence sterling each, which doubtless brought in a large revenue from the papists in the different kingdoms. On our return to town, we stopped at a farmhouse to get our sausage warmed and eat our dinner. The salt supplied us at our meal had garlic mixed therewith. Our hostess furnished a dessert of small figs and almonds, for which a trifling sum of money was considered as a sufficient remuneration. I saw a number of goldfinches flying about, the plumage of which appeared far more brilliant than those of England. We met a barber surgeon on an ass who was probably called into the country to bleed a patient, and Mr. W. gave me to understand that as money was a scarce article, he was obliged to receive payment in a fowl or some other produce of the farm. The women's dress was generally dark jackets and petticoats, some without sleeves. On the Sabbath I saw the people carrying their rush-bottomed chairs to church to sit on. The lateen-rigged craft belonging to this place are employed in smuggling salt into France and Italy. 2 of these vessels returned whilst I was here, and having made good voyages there was great rejoicing. Even the ecclesiastics paraded in procession on this happy occasion, and doubtless shared in the profits. I saw several windmills near this city with 6 vanes instead of 4. Seeing a large concourse of people one evening in the suburbs, I had the curiosity to join them to know the reason, and found a new cart with a mule standing by it, harnessed. Not at all accustomed to see such a machine, whenever they attempted to lower the shafts on its back, it got into a most violent rage, using its heels in every direction. At last it ran off with the vehicle, clearing its way through the crowd, and I was glad to shelter myself within a house door. I imagine this was the first cart that had appeared on the island. The numerous asses here kept up almost a continual braying at night, which we could distinctly hear on board when in bed. They are fed in a great measure on the leaves of cauliflower, which grow to a great size. Mr. W.S. informed me that he had seen or heard of the flower weighing 24 pounds. I never saw any so large, but I ordered a dozen with the roots for to take to sea, 3 of which on a man's shoulders was a good burden with the leaves on. The 26th we finished loading the salt. My bill of health received at Barcelona was returned to me endorsed, so that I was not put under the protection of any new saints. The 1st of March, 1790, the wind being fair, we got under sail. The 7th entered the Gut, and on the 8th, with the strong levanter, passed Cape Trafalgar. The 6th day after leaving the Straits, we had run 950 miles to the westward. The 20th, we saw a large bird of the booby kind, and the following day saw a sandbird, both of which I imagine were natives of the Azores. From April 7th to the 10th, we found the current running swiftly to the northward, and on the latter day experienced a strong gale with violent squalls, rain, thunder, and very fierce lightning, the waves running mountains high in the greatest confusion, and so dangerous that it was difficult to determine which way to lay the vessel's head to prevent foundering. The 19th, the wind being strong at the southeast, shifted suddenly to the northwest, when our vessel plunged so violently under water as to break the sprit sail yard in the thickest part. After this accident, we spoke the brig Ruby of Dundee from Havre for Philadelphia. The next day being moderate, her boat came to us for some provisions, as the crew were much in want. As this brig sailed much faster than our vessel, and the captain signifying his intention of pushing forward, I gave him a letter for my merchants to signify that I was not far off. This vessel soon ran us hull down, but on the 28th, while we were carrying a press of sail in foggy weather, we were not a little surprised at passing the Ruby, she being under low sails. I imagine, as the captain's reckoning was out, he was fearful to run for the land in thick weather. On the 1st of May we sprung our main yard in the slings, but having no carpenter on board, we turned to and fished it tolerably well. On the 7th got soundings in 25 fathoms, red sand with black specks. The 8th of May saw Cape Henlopen and entered the Delaware, having been 69 days from Yavachi. The 11th of May, 1790, we moored at Smith's Wharf, Philadelphia. My merchants here could not get their price for our salt. We were therefore ordered above the city, where we obtained a stone for a salt at a much cheaper rate than in Philadelphia. Near this place lay a very long steamboat, which I have seen stemming the tide at the rate of about 4 miles an hour. The steam worked paddles under each quarter, which pushed it along, but I was informed the friction was so great that the works often wanted repairs. Many fires broke out in the city at different times in stables and places, but as they were found in general to belong to corn factors, who were now standing out to oblige their corn porters to be content with their accustomed wages, it was supposed that the houses had been wilfully set on fire. I had an opportunity of witnessing the alacrity manifested by the inhabitants at these fires, and indeed dispatch is highly requisite, as the houses are generally covered with thin boards called shingles, made of cedar or cypress. Each housekeeper is obliged to keep in readiness 2 leather buckets, a tow-handled basket, and a bag to use at fires. I once attended at the door of the Senate to get a sight of the President on opening the session. I placed myself on the steps of the house. He soon afterwards arrived in an old coach, formerly belonging to Governor Penn, as I was informed. 2 secretaries were in the general's chariot, and both carriages were a dark cream color, apparently newly painted. The police officers, I believe, were the only attendants, the president disliking unnecessary state. He wore black velvet with a silk bag to his hair, and so much like the pictures of him that I had seen in England that I could easily have selected him from 1,000 men. The Senate was well crowded by the time I arrived at the top of the stairs, but I got near the door to hear part of the speech, and remained at the lower door till the president appeared again. He stood a minute on the steps to thank the officers for their attendance, and then dismissed them from further ceremony. I think I never saw him but once, but the chariot conducting Lady Washington was often to be seen in the streets. I visited the House of Representatives to hear the debates occasionally, to which there was free admission, and do not recollect ever seeing a single porter at the door, nor the gallery more than half filled. One morning about 11 o'clock I was there at the time of prayer, performed by a dissenting minister, and at that time few indeed attended in the gallery, the populace paying far more attention to their farms and their merchandise than to politics and debates. Near where our vessel lay at Kensington was a large spreading tree with dark green leaves, like the live oak. A friend of mine paced the diameter of the shade and supposed it to be nearly 100 feet across. It was a pleasant sight in the great heat prevailing here in summer. A great quantity of fireflies are to be seen here in the summer. The females sitting at their doors for air after dark catch them and place the insects on their hair, where they stay glowing a considerable time before they take wing. One evening, walking with a party, an insect of the beetle species flew into a lady's bosom and bit her severely. She screamed loudly and ran off to her dwelling to strip. After our salt was landed, we moved the vessel to Mr. Warder's wharf in the Northern Liberties to take on board pig iron, tar, red cedar, staves, etc. for Liverpool. Whilst at this wharf for 2 or 3 days in the month of May, a vast number of small, cream-colored butterflies were to be seen resting on walls and houses, with which people on the wharf baited fishhooks to catch perch and other small fish, which seized the bait greedily. On inquiry, I found it was a waterfly, which appeared annually for the space of 3 days and then disappeared. 'Tis probable it is one of the same species as the ephemeron seen on the Rhine in Germany. I had some conversation here with a shipbuilder who had been the master of a vessel during the American contest with England. This man in his youth had seen a raft ship built in America, when it was customary to send such to England, where they were broken up to sell the materials employed in their construction. I understood they were solidly built without planks and had no occasion for pumps. They were shaped fit for sailing with masts and sails like other ships, and had a kind of cabin for sheltering the crew, being nothing more than a raft of timber bound together with wood and iron, and the float very large. We lay here some time for want of suitable goods to load us, and during our detention news arrived that there was great probability of war between the Spaniards and the English relative to the settlements of Nootka Sound. The vessels laying here belonging to the Dons began to arm, and a report was in circulation that they meant to intercept all the British vessels on their leaving this port, which considerably alarmed us, as we actually saw their guns on board. The Alert being now ready for Liverpool, and the master fearing 2 Spanish armed schooners ready for sea also, went slyly to the coffee-house, and entered a notice in the intelligence book there that 2 British frigates had been seen off the capes of Delaware, and trusting this would have its intended effect on the Spaniards, sailed immediately, leaving me to look out for myself. But the armed vessels, in a few days after, departed also, leaving me at an uncertainty whether they meant to proceed immediately on their voyage or waylay me. By going from hence to Barcelona, last voyage, instead of returning to Britain, our seamen's articles were become void, and according to custom they were instigated by the landlords here to give me some trouble. Some of our men had left the vessel, intending to take away their chests at night, tied a stone to the dog's neck and drowned him. This kept me on the watch at night, and when I heard any of them creeping softly on board, I used to jump out of bed and, slipping a flannel gown on, attended to their motions in the companion. Others employed attorneys, and I was obliged to pay them their wages, as American ships gave more wages. I do not know anything so disagreeable to shipmasters as sailor hunting, for as they are generally half drunk, they do not care what trouble they give, and may be justly compared for obstinacy to the wild ass of the wilderness. The houses they board at and the brothels they frequent here have scarcely any furniture, and are the most filthy places of this description that I ever met with in any country. The sailors' chests are placed round the room and serve both for seats and beds, and in summer are the residence of innumerable hosts of flies, which creep into their punch glasses, being attracted by the sugar. Indeed, these houseflies are very troublesome both in all dwellings and churches in the warm weather. In the latter I have been bit by numbers on my face and, during the service, have been obliged to keep my handkerchief in motion to drive them off, while others were piercing my legs almost continually. Mirrors in the dwellings are at this season covered with black gauze, and at the time of dinner a servant is employed with a whisk to drive them off the face and dishes. As those insects are apt to dirt the goods in the shop windows, a young man of genius has full employment in painting the different species on sale on the inside of the glass. I was acquainted with an old lady who remembered the rabbits running about in the spot where one of the central streets is now built in this city. I shall now speak of my departure, which took place the 8th of July, having procured a passenger for Liverpool, whom I took at a low rate to obtain him. He was an agent sent to America by the British manufacturers, and he was so extremely parsimonious as to save the twine and paper wherewith his goods were packed, to carry again to England in his baggage. This man laid in a most miserable sea store, but as few passengers went from hence to Liverpool, I was glad to catch him, though he was truly a stingy bachelor and a complete character known by the name of Miss Molly. The 8th of July, 1790, as soon as I secured the men on board, I sent the vessel to Chester to wait for me. The 9th, Mr. Roberts, the passenger, and myself took places in the Baltimore stage for Chester, and just as we left town, the carriage broke down, which detained us some time. These stages, known here by the name of coaches, are longer than a coach, having 4 seats, each for 2 people, all with their faces towards the horses. The upper panels are all open with leathers rolled up, to let down in bad weather, and as the country is to be seen in every direction, they have much the advantage of the stages in England during the summer, but not in the winter. We crossed the Schuylkill River on a floating bridge, which parts in the middle when vessels pass. I had often heard that Mrs. Withers at Chester kept the best house for entertaining company in this state. We therefore determined to dine there, and were not disappointed in our expectations. Our vessel appearing as soon as we had dined, we went on board. The 12th we anchored in Holdkill Roads, the wind being contrary. The pilot was now going to leave us, and as I had never seen Lewistown, where the pilots generally reside within Cape Henlopen, Mr. R. and myself landed with him on the beach of the Cape. After walking about half a mile, partly through the bushes, we came to a muddy creek over which we were ferried in a small boat and entered the town, if such an insignificant place is worthy of that appellation, though I believe it has a courthouse. Our pilot conducted us to an inn, which we entered, but seeing nothing attracting and much disgusting, we left it to walk through this straggling place, and the houses being small and the inhabitants far beneath a state of mediocrity. We saw one decent building, which we learned belonged to a gentleman who had been a colonel in the army. This gentleman we afterwards met, and after some conversation, he invited us to take tea with his family, which we accepted. On entering a pleasant, white-limed parlor, we observed bunches of asparagus hung up here and there near the ceiling to attract the flies from dirtying the nice white walls, and being fresh and green with red berries, had a cool and neat appearance. Towards dusk we took our leave, and found our way to the beach where our boat was, but no appearance of the crew. After calling some time, we went amongst the bushes, and found a little hut where they had been regaling themselves with their beloved grog. We got them away, and after some labor, launched the boat and arrived safe on board. The 14th, the wind veering towards the south, we got under sail, but as we approached the sea, we found a great swell sitting in, and as the wind was getting again to the east, we returned to anchor till the 17th, and then sailed with the wind at northwest. The 20th, we took our anchors from the bows and secured them on the forecastle, and this was my general custom on this vessel in crossing the Atlantic, as she plunged so much in the sea that the stocks would be washed loose if left on the bows. This day we observed 2 vessels in the southern quarter standing towards us, and afterwards observing they were schooners rigged, we concluded them to be the Spaniards who had left the Delaware before us, and this idea was so prevalent that double cloths were put on to secure them from plunder. But these vessels passed us to the northward without speaking us, and this gave us unutterable satisfaction. The 21st we had a strong gale. The heavy sea occasioned by it broke in our quarter-boards. The 30th sounded on the bank in 40 fathoms, saw several vessels, spoke a French brig fishing. At noon saw several vessels on the fishery at anchor. The 31st saw 2 sails at anchor. Very foggy weather with rain, which obliged us to keep a good lookout to keep clear of the fishermen at anchor. At 8 a.m. sounded in 90 fathoms, coarse gravel, which indicated that we were now on the east edge of the bank. One of the French brigs we spoke was driving, the other was at anchor, contrary to the conditions of the treaty between the 2 nations, and our ships of war often obliged the French to lift their anchor when brought up on the Great Bank. After leaving soundings, we had many easterly winds, and did not enter the Irish Channel till the 20th of August, and on the same day got soundings in 73 fathoms white sand. with black and red specks. Perhaps it may not be amiss to advise all shipmasters coming from the Western Ocean and bound to the south of Ireland, our St. George's Channel, to run in the latitude of 50 degrees 50 minutes north, and to be careful of a northerly current. And when they have struck soundings in this latitude, not exceeding 60 fathoms, they may be sure they are advancing on the Nymph Bank, and are then to the eastward of Cape Clear, and may haul to the northward and make the Irish land at pleasure. Many vessels run for the west of Ireland, and at night or in foggy weather get embayed, to the great risk of lives and property. But by adopting my method, they may run in safety, attending to the lead occasionally. The 22nd of August, 1790, passed Holyhead and got safe on the 23rd into George's Dock Basin, about 36 days' passage. My owners had been apprised of my arrival by signal, which gives information long before the vessel enters the river, and before she can be seen from the town. This is managed on a hill in Cheshire, opposite Liverpool, on which the merchants have each flagstaffs. On this eminence there is also a lighthouse kept by an old seaman who had been, I think, 14 voyages to Africa in the slave trade. This man and his wife manage all the signals. When a Liverpool vessel approaches the northwest buoy at the entrance of the dangerous sands and shoals lying without the mouth of the Mersey, a signal is made by the vessel that she belongs to such a merchant. The man residing at Bidston Lighthouse hoists the flag on that merchant's pole, and at the same time displaying a blackboard on one of 3 poles erected on the lighthouse, certifies whether the vessel making her signal is either a snow, brig, or ship. I learned from my owners that after I had left the port, they had purchased a ship of about 400 tons. The new ship had been sent to New York and was returning with flour, staves, etc. She got so near to Liverpool as to make her signal with a pilot on board, and having entered the channel near the northwest buoy, had anchored to stop the ebb tide. The day was remarkably fine. One of the underwriters had actually erased her name from his book as being safe arrived before he sat down to dinner. But having finished his meal, he cast his eyes again on Bidston Hill, and to his great surprise saw a signal for a vessel being on shore in the rock channel. The next ebb washed away the sand under her middle, and she burst in pieces, a total wreck. What uncertain property ships are. A puff of wind or a trifling mistake, and they are no more. The pilot of this ship had been suspended 12 months for misconduct. During this time, a spit had increased from one of the shoals, which he was not aware of, and on this he wrecked the vessel. Mr. 1010 had purchased a ship at Lancaster in lieu of the one lost, and she was now arrived here. Her name was the Brothers, a 3-decked ship well known on the Jamaica trade as a letter of marque in the American War, and was intended for the Quebec trade. I now got our vessel into the graving dock to caulk and coat her bottom, and whilst the shipwrights were at work, a hole was discovered very low down, apparently bored by an auger from the inside while building, and there was nothing but a chip about the thickness of a barley corn pitched over. In this hazardous condition, this vessel had crossed the Atlantic a number of times. Sailors may well say, "I can't die till my time comes." It will be recollected that I went to Bristol with Captain 516 when he was ill. The sickness ended his life, and his son, 19J16, then a youth, was made master of the vessel for to assist his mother and family. A steady mate was also continued in her. This young man I shall frequently have to mention, both as a friend and enemy, in future years. Mr. 19J16 had spent much of his time in Liverpool, and as his vessel lay frequently many months in the year in the docks there, he had a general acquaintance with gay families, which by degrees drew me also into the fashionable circle, to attend on females, to play in routs, and one Sabbath evening, at a tea-party, I was much hurt and astonished to hear a lady of the house, at the pianoforte, sing the Scotch song of Sweet Lullaby, me being a strict churchman on Sundays. Conceiving this conduct a gross violation of the Sabbath, I soon took my leave of the party and retired to my lodgings. The remembrance of this improper company or acquaintance made me more circumspect in future, and believe I never went more than twice to a play after this during my future life. I hope you enjoyed this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Please like, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Be sure to check out the description to see how you can support this project and others. And tune in next time for more from the Journal of Samuel Kelly.